Honor and pleasure to be here with Rabbi Dr. Aryeh Cohen, who is a professor of Rabbinic literature at the Ziegler School for Rabbinic Studies of the American Jewish University in Los Angeles, and is the rabbi in residence at Ben the Ark, a Jewish Partnership for Justice. Check out his recent book, Justice in the City, an argument from the sources of Rabbinic Judaism. We share quite a bit in common in that we are both deeply invested in Jewish learning, in halakha and in Talmud and in Midrash, and see that as deeply informing our worldview around making the world more just and holy. So thanks for taking this time.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
To start off, what do you mean when you suggest that social justice can be a spiritual practice?
So, oftentimes we think that social justice is being something that's an adjunct, that's an add-on. It's very nice. You keep Shabbos, you keep kosher, right. You learn, and then it's nice if you go out and you try to make things better in the world. In actuality, I think that social justice or creating justice in the world is of the warp and woof of Judaism. So the Rambam, for example, Maimonides, at the end of the Guide for the Perplexed, in the last chapter, talks about the fact that he takes his own type of virtue ethics and extends it further. He says Aristotle understood that in order to be a philosopher, you had to transcend material goods, you had to transcend wealth, you had to transcend strength. All that was good, but that wasn't great. You had to get towards truth. Jeremiah, Maimonides says, realized that you needed beyond that chesed mishpat u'tzedakah. You needed love, justice, and righteousness. And more than that, not only did you have to just understand that and know that, but, and this is where he goes beyond Plato and the cave, is that he said you have to then do that and bring that back to earth. You have to create justice on the earth. And that's the end of the path. Mm-hmm. So which is doubly fantastic because Maimonides saw the path as a philosophical path, a path of knowing what God was, or for Maimonides, what God wasn't. But actually the end of contemplation is not enough if it just stays at contemplation. It has to come back to creating justice in the world. What's interesting is that once you get that perspective, you realize that a lot of the discussions in the Talmud actually go beyond the legal to the just, right? And sometimes, so for example, there's a great story in Bava Metzia which talks about a porter who was carrying jugs of wine and they broke. And so the guy who hired him brought him to a court, and the court of Rava, and said to Rava, this guy broke my jugs. So the porter said, look, we've been working all day, and we're going to go home, and we're not going to have any money, and we're not going to have anything to eat. Right. So Rava said to the guy, pay him the money, pay him their salary. Yeah. And the guy said, and we're starving. He said, okay, give them money to have some food. And it's not that, and this comes after a long discussion of when a porter is and is not liable for the tools that they work with. So it's not that law doesn't have a place, but rather any law which ends up in somebody having to go home hungry is not just, cannot be a law. Yeah. And so you start to see, if you pay attention, you start to see that at the center, the essence of Judaism is this desire, is this obligation to create a just world. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You mentioned the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim, right? The Guide for the Perplexed. And then obviously earlier on, he talks about the purpose of all this being about the welfare of the body and the welfare of the soul, and body meaning the just state. So it seems like it's not only a messianic end goal towards the end of the book, but also that it is, like you said, part and parcel of what the whole system is about.
Right, and Maimonides in another place talks about the fact that when you're talking about labor contracts, right. He says that labor contract has to be passed by an Adam Chashuv, and so an Adam Chashuv, an important person. Right. A lot of the medieval commentators talk about what does that mean, a pious person, but Maimonides says it's a person who knows how to set out the affairs of a state in a just manner. Yeah. So for him, it's really the structure of society. To be just, it has to be. Now, we know that, Maimonides, there are some problems with Maimonides also. He lived in a certain reality. Right. Says some awful things about women, but in essence, what he's saying here is that the end of Judaism is to create justice on earth.
So just to inquire a little bit further here. So I understand intellectually that we want to go beyond law, and that is kind of a spiritual concept. But what do you mean is this is a spiritual practice? Like on an experiential level, on an existential level, phenomenological level, what do you mean that this concept and this work it can be a spiritual practice?
So that's a great question, and so I love the example of levaya, of having to accompany somebody out of your house for cubits. Now, what does that mean? I mean, what are you saying? When somebody comes over and you're hosting them and they leave, you walk out with them. What you're saying is that your boundaries of your responsibility are not the boundaries of your house. And that concept is developed and can be developed because there are two places that levaya is used. It's either here, either here or levaya tamet, right? When you accompany a dead person. There, what you're doing is doing a chesed shel amet, right? You're doing a favor that can't be returned, right? So the same thing is happening here. What you are doing when you accompany somebody outside of your house and on their way, you're saying, I am responsible to you, not only in front of my heart, which was the Greek notion of ethics, I am responsible for you in the world. And more than that, so that practice, I love that practice, because that practice is then instilling in you the notion that when you walk down the street and you see a homeless person, you see a person on the street, that person is part of your community, because the boundaries of your obligation extend beyond your geographical boundaries. And you can turn that around, and that notion of levaya, there's a Gemara that says, kofin ala levaya, that you force people to accompany others when they're going through town. You force people, so the city has a responsibility to make sure that nobody is left out by themselves, is left alone.
Right. It's beautiful. So just to translate some of that, the notion of levaya as the mitzvah of accompanying a casket or accompanying someone deceased towards the funeral, and also out of their home, out of one's home, this understanding that we're responsible even once they're outside of our personal sphere is very powerful. And on a similar lines, the way I think of halakha itself, either conceptually, is either just the way we walk in the world, conscious of our responsibility in all directions, but also translating the word as progress itself, kind of walking forward.
Right.
And thinking that the law has to move in line with what is just, and to go beyond the law in that sense also.
It's also the notion of halakha, of walking, is actually walking in the world. So Immanuel Levinas, the great French philosopher, has this wonderful essay called Cities of Refuge, in which he talks about the notion of Yerushalayim, Ir shechubra la yachdav, Jerusalem, a city that was bound together. And oftentimes the Midrash talks about this as being the earthly Jerusalem and the heavenly Jerusalem.
Right.
And his point in that essay is to say that you can only get to the heavenly Jerusalem through the earthly Jerusalem. It's not that there's a way to transcend the earthly Jerusalem. You have to get through the streets, through creating justice and recognizing that there are other people in the city whom you have to treat in a just manner.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's like so central to what Judaism is about, or at least the type of Judaism we embrace. And the Levinas move from the abstract to the concrete, that our ethical commitments aren't some abstract principles, but they're right in front of us in this encounter with human beings. And I was
thinking one more. On Sunday was Purim,
right?
And so as you know, one of the mitzvot is matzonot levinim, right? And to give gifts to the poor. Usually, people spend a lot of time making mishloach manot, which is great. And Sudat Purim and getting drunk, and I'm there. In California, we just passed proposition that now marijuana is legal, so we have all kinds of different ways of Sudat Purim. But matzonot levinim, and here back again, the Rambam says that the most important mitzvah is matzonot levinim. And so in our community, what we do, and other communities also, we make kind of mini survival packs, and we go down to Skid Row. Now, the point is, and this has to be really stressed, we're not solving anything. Right. Every year, I get the feeling that we're emptying an ocean with a spoon, which is the feeling you should get, because that's what leverages you to the political. Right? When you do that, then you have to, if you're a feeling person, ask the question, how is it in the richest city in the country that
and that's where chesed is actually useful for social justice work, in the sense that if it truly is transformative, if we have an encounter, if we realize how lacking it is, and we don't leave with a sense of self-fulfillment and completion, but actually more challenged and riled up by this encounter of injustice in the world, then, so actually it's a good segue into the next question, which is, How would you differentiate social justice work from social action work? And would you put them in the same category in terms of being a spiritual practice?
So I think they're both spiritual practice.
Yeah.
As long as in social action work, it brings you face to face with the other,
right,
with the person, and seeing their vulnerability, looking them in their face, and hearing them, hearing their voice. The difference between social action and social justice is the question. Right? Social action is providing food to the hungry, providing shelter, which is really important.
Yeah.
Social justice is asking, why are there hungry people? Why are there homeless people? And without the second, you just keep doing the first, right? Without the second, you just keep, we keep going on, and to be a little cynical, we feel good about ourselves because, what'd you do? I volunteered at the homeless kitchen. But when it came time to vote, I voted against raising my taxes because taxes.
Right. I mean, and social action can be more spiritually fulfilling because we encounter it, we feel connected to it. The social justice work, a long time, lots of losses before there's wins.
Right.
So it's much more difficult to keep that spiritual fire alive, I think.
That's true, and so therefore it's really, really important to create a community around social justice.
Yes.
Right, because when you go out in the street, I find myself, perhaps I'm odd, but I find myself at home on the street with lots of people who are going together, or I find myself at home when I'm advocating with a city council person, saying this is the right thing to do.
Right, very powerful. So in your book, Justice in the City, which we highly recommend, you make an argument for a theory of justice, which, as the subtitle says, is an argument for the sources of Rabbinic Judaism. On one foot, what would you say, what is that theory?
So the theory is that a just city is a city which has three principles. First principle is to be like God and not like Pharaoh. Meaning, hear the cry of the poor. Set up your city. Not only that you have to hear the cry of the poor, but you have to set up your urban spaces so that you can hear the cry of the poor. The second principle is the principle of dissent. That whenever if there's something wrong, as the Gemara says, there's something wrong that's going on in your family, your neighborhood, your community, or the world, you have to speak out. You can't be quiet. You have to, and if you don't speak out, you're culpable. Right? Like Heschel said, in a democracy, not all are responsible, but all are culpable. And the third is the principle that we...
No, the opposite. Not all are culpable, all are responsible.
I never remember.
Right. So yeah, good.
They're sitting
right. When you're writing poetry instead of logic.
Exactly. And the third principle is this principle that we talked about a little bit, which is accompaniment, which is that your boundaries of responsibility are greater than the boundaries, your geographical boundaries. And so I live in Los Angeles, which, like Scottsdale, is a very spread out city. Right. And so the different cities, I live in West LA, and people who live 3 miles away from me are living in abject poverty. Right. So Beverly Hills and Inglewood, which are two different neighborhoods, which are like 15 minutes away from each other by car, barely have diplomatic relations with each other, right? And so what this principle says is that we are all part of the same city, if not necessarily part of the same municipality. We're part of the same county, definitely. We have an obligation to each other to know what's going on with each other. And the question is how to create relationships of justice in those anonymous interactions with people who you don't know.
I remember when I lived in LA, going to South LA, I met kids there were teenagers who had never left a 4 or 5 mile radius. They'd never been to the ocean. They grew up their whole lives in LA, 15 years or 6 years, they'd never been to the ocean a few miles away. I mean, it's, so how to build those relationships, and is that happening on a systemic level yet? Or?
I don't know on a systemic level. Certain things are happening at a systemic level. So I would say that there are amazing things happening with the Jewish and Muslim community in LA, which is a little different, right? But even though it's its own chasm that had to be crossed, there's certain things that are happening. I know that I personally, over the last 5 years, have gotten more comfortable in Leimert Park, which is the heart of the historic Black neighborhood around Crenshaw. There are certain spaces, the Black Jewish Justice Alliance, which is creation of CLU and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and then the Arc My organization is part of it also, where we're trying to resurrect political alliances from bygone years between the Black and the Jewish community. But I can't say that on an overall level it's more than it's Black History Month, it's Martin Luther King weekend, let's have somebody else.
Okay, so my last question for you, with Pesach coming up, what are some practices, some practices from Judaism that help us to cultivate this this consciousness and perpetuate this type of life commitment? And in particular, how can Pesach be a vehicle for that? With your last minute, right?
So Pesach, so of course, since Arthur Waskow and the Freedom Center, Pesach has been kind of the home, as Shlomo Karlach would say, is the headquarters of Jewish social justice.
Right.
So I would say one practice that I've started doing over the past several years is that when we start the Seder, we say Halach Ma'anya.
Right.
This is the bread of the affliction. All who need should come and eat. All who want to celebrate should come and join us.
Yeah.
But we usually do that after we've already locked the door and we're all sitting around the table.
Right.
And so the last several years, we've gone out in the street.
Love that.
And that's, we haven't found anybody yet. Every once in a while, we annoyed somebody who's walking by.
Right.
But it's the notion, again, of going outside and opening up
I'm going to do that this year.
to everybody.
Love it.
And beyond that, it's asking I think that the most important question we can ask on Pesach, sometimes we make a mistake in saying that B'chol Dor V'Dor in every generation means that we have to remember that we were slaves.
Right.
But that's not it. We have to remember that we were liberated.
Mm-hmm.
And our liberation needs to be needs to show the possibility of liberation for other people also.
Yeah.
Because if we remember that we were slaves, we don't really remember that we were slaves. We can remember that we're liberated.
Right.
And if we remember that we were liberated, then we can use that energy and work to help other people in their liberation.
Right. Beautiful. Thank you. So, is your blog your blog is by the same name as your book, right?
Yes.
Okay, so check out Ben the Ark, where Rabbi Dr. Aryeh Cohen is rabbi in residence, and check out his blog, Justice in the City, and also that book, which can be found on Amazon.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
All the
you.
best. Hatzlacha, Rabbi.